Bonjour et bienvenue sur la chaîne. Je suis Mademoiselle Edwards, and for this video, we'll be continuing with the 2021 CSEC French Paper 2 exam. So we've already covered section 1, which has the directed situations, and I gave some suggested responses. So if you haven't seen that video, you can go ahead and watch that as well. In this video, we'll cover section 2, which has to do with letter writing. And by now you should know you're writing a complete letter in French between 130 to 150 words. So before we start, I'm going to give you a few tips that you should know going into the exam as it pertains to letter writing. So the first tip is to read the prompt and required cues carefully. Alright, so the prompt would be the gist of whatever it is that you have to write. So are you taking a trip? Are you going on a school? Are you entering a school competition or something like that? The prompt will tell you what you are writing about and also to whom you're writing. Their cues are the 4 to 5 items that are listed, and you must include them in your letter. If you don't, you won't be given the full 30 marks. So you want to ensure that you include those. My second tip would be to ensure you use the appropriate vocabulary required. So based on the themes that you would have covered, home and family, school and career, so on and so forth, you would have to know what the prompt is about or what theme it involves, and then place or put the correct vocabulary that's required. My third tip is to plan and write simply. So do not include information that is not necessary. Try to plan your letter in a way that it's logical and coherent, and also that it follows the cues that you need to include. When we say write simply, don't try to use overly complicated sentences. Your English vocabulary or knowledge is higher than your French knowledge. So don't try to think in English and then literally translate it to paper. It won't work all the time. All right, because there are different grammar rules as it pertains to English and French. So you don't want to do that in the exam. The fourth tip is to incorporate the correct tenses. So when you've read your prompt and your required cues, you'll get an idea of what tense it is that you need to use. Are you going to be talking about something in the past? Are you talking about something in the future? So on and so forth. So you have to read your prompt and cues carefully to know which tense you have to write. Tips 4 and 5 go hand in hand. You must have correct subject-verb agreement and noun-adjective agreement. Right? So whomever it is that is doing the action, ensure that the verb matches that person or persons. And your adjective, you should also think if it's masculine singular, plural, feminine, right, in order to be grammatically sound. So when you are doing your writing or writing the letter, ensure that these two things are done so that you won't lose marks as it pertains to grammar, right? Tip 7, ensure you have the correct structure for your letter. So you would have learned, hopefully, what it is, what the structure of the letter should be. So your date, your greeting, the body of the letter, and your closing, right? So ensure you have the correct structure for the letter, and I'm going to show you what it should look like on your exam paper. Don't try to put everything in one lump sum paragraph when you're writing the letter. It's better to separate them into paragraphs so that you know where each cue falls, and so that the examiner can also identify, where you've written your answers, right? So try to separate them in paragraphs. And lastly, review what you've written. Give yourself enough time to work through the section, and also give yourself time to review what you have written to ensure that numbers 1 to 7 on this list are complete. Right, because if you haven't reviewed your work, you might have some errors on your paper, so you want to give yourself ample time to check over your work. All right, so I'm gonna go into the what the candidates had to do for this paper. So here are the prompts and cues. So it says you have just returned from your first trip abroad. Write a letter to a French friend in which you recount your experience. So based on this prompt, you know that you're talking about travel. Your theme is travel, and you're writing about something in the past tense, right? You have just returned. Recount your experience. So you have to look at these things to know what it is you are about to write, and also who it is that you are addressing. So it says a French friend, so your salutation at the beginning would be singular, right? So the cues that you must include in the letter: details of the trip, where you went, how long you stayed, who accompanied you. 2, the activities in which you participated, one specific activity which you really enjoyed and why. And 4, why you would recommend this place for a holiday. So the cues are also in the past tense, 1 to 3, and then in number 4 it asks you to give a recommendation. So you could use the subjunctive, the imperative, conditional tense to make this recommendation here. Also for Q3, it says that you're giving one specific activity that you like. Up here, I try to put another activity. So maybe you give 2 or 3 up here, and then you would try to find a fourth one, or put 2 here and try to find a third, right? So that you can show the examiner you're versed, you have a wide vocabulary bank, and you don't have to repeat a lot. All right, so I'm gonna now show you the structure of the exam, what it is that you need to ensure you have, so that you're writing the letter correctly. So the first thing is for you to have your place that you're writing from and your date. So we have Luxembourg, le 15 d'avril 2022. Alright, so notice how the date is written. This is how it should be and no other way. Your place comes before, and then a comma follows and the date. Then you would have to give your salutation. So, dear Pierre, dear Anne-Marie, the word dear, which would be share, you have to ensure that it matches whomever it is that you're talking to. So my example here, mon cher Pierre. Pierre is a male, so share is in its masculine form. Feminine form would be an E with an accent aigu, right? And then a comma is followed. So you need to have your date in the top right hand corner of your paper, and then in the left hand side, that's where you will now have the opening greeting. So we're gonna put an introduction before you start writing the cues. So this part of the letter now, you should have this information going into the exam. So you need to put an introduction rather, and ask the person how they're doing, express good wishes about their health, thank them for a previous letter. Any of that could be done in your opening paragraph. So here I've written, comment ça va? J'espère que tout va bien. J'ai le plaisir de t'annoncer que j'ai fait mon premier voyage à l'étranger. So I've asked the person how they're doing, hoping that they're fine, and I'm now expressing or telling them why it is I'm bothering them on this particular day to write this letter to them, right? So remember, in our prompt, it said that we've just returned from our first trip abroad. So that's what I'm telling the person. I'm telling you, or I'm announcing to you, that I went on my first trip abroad, right? So this would be your introduction. So statements like comment ça va or quoi de neuf could be used when you're asking how they are. and then you further wish them good health and so on and so forth in your opening paragraph, right? And this was 21 words. So now we can get into using our cues. So the first cue that we had asked us to give details about our trip. So who we went with, where we stayed, and how long we stayed, right? So I've written here, pendant les grandes vacances, je suis allée en Martinique avec ma famille. Nous avons séjourné à l'hôtel Batellerie pendant 2 semaines. So, I've mentioned where I went. Je suis allée en Martinique. I've mentioned who I went with, avec ma famille. And I've also mentioned how long I stayed and where I stayed, right? Nous avons séjourné à l'hôtel Batellerie for, so we stayed at a hotel, and this is the name of the hotel, for 2 weeks, right? So you want to try to write as simply as you can in order to bring across your information. Another thing that you could do, which I've done here, and you'll see some more examples, you can put a bit of cultural element to some of the letters that you're writing. So if it is that they ask or tell you about writing about a trip, if you have knowledge of the culture or popular places in these countries, you can mention them, right? But if it is that you don't know the places, you could just give, the general vocabulary. So I could have written, we stayed at a hotel, instead of giving the name of a hotel, if you get what I'm saying, right? But if you know the culture, you can apply it. All right. So this was Q1 and it has been answered, and this was also 21 words. Here we have Q number 2, which asked us to mention some activities that we participated in. So remember, I went with my family. So I've written, ma famille et moi sommes allés à plage de Céline. Nous avons visité les 3 îlets qui comptent de nombreux restaurants et marchés artisanaux. J'y ai acheté des souvenirs pour mes amis. Nous avons appris la poterie au village de la poterie. C'était fantastique. So I've mentioned a few activities here, and some of them are actual places in Martinique that I know. Again, you can apply culture if you know it. If you don't, you could just say, for example, ma famille et moi sommes, we went to the beach, instead of giving the name of a beach, right? So I mentioned that we went to the beach, mentioned that we went to a number of restaurants and crafts markets. What I did there, I bought souvenirs for my friends. Some things you can add in a bit more information, because the cues are just general. So you could add in probably 1 or 2 sentences to further explain something, but also be mindful of your word count if you're going to do that, right? So nous avons appris la poterie. We learned pottery at Village de la Poterie, right? Try to also, if they ask you for descriptions of or activities or details and so on and so forth, try to describe what it was like. So c'était fantastique, it was fantastic. C'était amusant, c'était incroyable. Try to describe what the experience was like. All right, so this was cue number 2, and I think we used how many words was this? I think, yeah, 43 words for this one. So mine is a lot because I've put named places, but again, you can just put you went to the beach, you went to restaurants, and so on and so forth. Cue number 3 asked us to mention an activity that we really liked and why. So here I have, surtout, j'ai aimé faire de la randonnée sur le Mont Pelé parce que j'adore la nature. J'ai pris beaucoup de photos d'oiseaux et de plantes. So above all, I liked hiking on Mount Pelée because I love nature. Very simple activity and simple explanation, right? So don't try to overcomplicate your sentences. Keep it very simple. The simpler you go to get your point across, the better it is for you. You make less grammatical errors. And I've added a sentence to say what I did while hiking. So I mentioned that I took a lot of photos of pictures and plants, right? Because j'adore la nature. Alright, and this was 25 words. Very simple. So in my closing paragraph now, and it's also going to be cue number 4, they've asked me to recommend the place that I visited. So I'm recommending this place to Pierre. I always like to include a question in my closing paragraph so that it ties back in the person who I'm writing to. So you can put it at the beginning or you can put it at the end of the closing paragraph before your closing line here. Right? So I've asked Pierre now, as-tu des projets de voyage bientôt? Je te recommande de visiter la Martinique parce qu'il y a beaucoup à faire. Il fait beau et les gens sont sympathiques. C'est plus un bûcher de pain. Écris-moi vite. So do you have any plans? Do you have any plans soon? I'm recommending that you visit Martinique because there's a lot to do. And I've mentioned now what it's like in Martinique. So il fait beau. The weather is nice et les gens sont sympathiques. And and the people are kind or the people are nice. I've added an idiom here. C'est pour un bûcher de pain. So I'm basically saying here that it's very cheap. It costs nothing. And then I have a closing line, écris-moi vite. Students tend to always write this. Oh, I missed my accent over écrit. But students tend to always use this closing line, écris-moi vite, because it's very easy to remember, right? So after you've written your final paragraph now, do not forget to, and this was cue number 4 with the closing line at the end, and it's 36 words. Don't forget to include your final your farewell, right? So after you've written, write to me soon. I can't wait to hear from you, or whatever your closing line would be going into the exam. So you have to know your closing line. You need to remember to put your farewell, and your farewell comes in the bottom left hand corner of your paper. So you can write ton ami, and if it's female, it's gonna end with an E. If it's male, it's gonna end with an I. You could write amitié, bisou, any of those could work, and your name at the end. So your name, it doesn't have to be your real name when you're writing the letter, right? So you put that at the end, and that's how you complete your letter. So I'm gonna show you what it should look like now, the entire thing, right? So dates up here, your opening salutation, and your body of your letter in paragraphs. And remember, your body is where your word count will be, taken from. So you want to ensure they're separated and your examiner can identify, the cues that you have answered. So you ensure you have your date, your greeting, your opening greeting. Ensure that share matches whomever it is that you're speaking to, whether it's male or female, singular, plural, etc. And then you want to ensure your opening or your introduction has how the person is doing, an expression that you wish them well or something like that, why it is you are writing your letter. Then your cues separated into paragraphs, and you need to have your closing line, or for me you could have a closing question as well to tie in the person or bring them back into the letter, whomever it is you're writing to. Your closing farewell and your name. All right, so some other things I want to point out again from the tip list that I gave you. Right, ensure that you check over, of course. Ensure that you have correct subject verb agreement, noun adjective agreement. So Veronique is the person writing the letter. So je suis allée to is because she's female, right? Ma famille et moi sommes allés. So everything has to be grammatically sound. I'm describing what the people are like in Martinique. Les gens sont sympathiques. So the noun matches with the adjective and also the verb here. Ensure that you have those things. Another thing that you want to include is or words of, you could include words of frequency or those transitional phrases that give your writing a bit of oomph. So surtout, pendant. You have other examples like toutefois, néanmoins, de plus, en outre. Try to put those in appropriate places so that it can give your letter another kick. All right, try to also find ways to use up your pronouns. So rather than repeating the places, I have j'ai acheté, I bought so and so there. You need to know your pronouns so that you're not repeating things. What else is there? Your idioms. You can have one or two nice idioms that you know and include it in your letter as well. You don't need to go overkill with it, but two or one or two would be fine in the exam, to show that you know how to use it in the language. Right, so again, this is what it should look like, your letter. Oh, and another thing, remember to describe an experience. C'était fantastique. So know your adjectives that you could use to describe describe a situation. So it was fun, it was annoying, or something like that, right? And you should be fine going into the exam, right? So you're not going to necessarily think of the 130 to 150 words on the day. So you have to pre-plan and go into the exam with enough vocabulary, like the opening lines and your closing lines, to know whatever it is, to know what you're going to ask the person at the beginning and also say to them at the end. Écris-moi vite, comment ça va, quoi de neuf, and so on and so forth. Right? So you have to know those vocabulary going in, so it lessens the burden of having to think of the 130 to 150 words. Alright, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video when I cover the contextual dialogue from this paper. So leave a comment down below and also subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed. And au revoir, bonne chance.